Welcome to the Tearing It Up podcast. I'm your host, Taryn. We'll be tearing it up, tearing it down, and tearing it apart, dissecting all things related to those who deviate from the standard. From leaders of their industry to leaders of mediocrity, and maybe a gear review or two thrown in. We shoot the shit and let the conversations flow, so if that's not your style, this may not be for you. Otherwise, listen in. Hope to light a fire in you somehow. Yay, we are live, and it's still March, which means Women's History Month, and we're excited to finally have a guest on this month, a wonderful woman, Nicole, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Amber so she can talk about how she knows Nicole. She knows her personally up in Tacoma, Washington, and just like give her intro and all that. So Amber, how did you meet Nicole and all that?
Man. How did we meet? I think we met through friends, through our little Tacoma crew. And I think that one of my first services that I did with Nicole was a Reiki reading. And that's when she really got to know me. We really got to know each other. And since she's been doing Reiki, her career took a turn. And so she's starting to do death work and is a death doula. She has her own business and is a very successful and inspirational woman. And I've been loving to getting to know her over the past few years. And so I'm also doing her grief recovery course right now. And I just really wanted to have her on. So here is my girl, Nicole.
Yay.
Oh, yay. Thanks, friend.
So excited because Amber has been talking about you for a while. Again, I always am never sure how much is like offline versus online when we talk about you, but I know she's mentioned like wanting to have you on here. So I'm so excited to be able to do that as well.
Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be on.
Yeah. So Nicole, if you want to just give us a little background. So as Amber mentioned, you did some Reiki and now you're in I don't even know, what do you say? Like, so I'm used to the word industry and like the outdoor industry, fitness industry. Like, I don't know, do you say the death industry?
Yes, death industry, death care. Yes, and it's an industry. It's just like every other industry.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of, we'll say, industry adjacent. I would say the industry would be the funeral industry, which I work in as well. I'm an executive assistant at a funeral home, but I am also a death doula, certified end-of-life specialist, death educator, and a grief recovery specialist. So I do everything death, dying, and bereavement.
Lots of titles. You've earned them too. It's been really great watching your journey through all of this.
Thanks. Yeah, I started out as a dancer. I was going to be a showgirl when I grew up. And then that turned into a naturopathic assistant and phlebotomist and lab technician, which turned into a Reiki practitioner, which wasn't really Reiki. It's more intuitive healing. I would say pretty much all Reiki is accompanied by some other form of intuitive healing. Mm-hmm. And then into a death doula, into certified end-of-life specialist, and then grief recovery specialist. So all things with death, dying, and bereavement. Yeah.
Yeah, you just never know where life's going to take you.
No kidding. I mean, that's a long, in the death industry, it's a big change from being a dancer.
Yes. Yeah, huge. I mean, I feel like even for a lot of people, I feel like doula, like even birth doulas are, I mean, I know that it's been around forever, but it wasn't as, I guess, like mainstream even until a little more recently. So like a death doula, many people just don't even know, which we can dive deeper into that like later or however it fits in. But like people just don't even know that exists either. Like, what is a doula, the definition of a doula in general? Do you have that? Like
a person who serves, so a death doula or a death midlife, or there's quite a few names, end of life specialist. It's a person who assists in the dying process, much like a midwife doula, bringing somebody and transitioning someone into this world. A death doula transitions them out of this world in a comfortable way, or as comfortable as we can make it for them. We basically just aim to help families cope with the death process and recognize that it's natural and a very important part of life.
Mm-hmm. And it's also different than hospice.
Different than hospice.
Yes.
Yes. Hospice will also provide care at end of life, but we can't do anything medical. So like palliative care and hospice where they can administer medical treatment, death doulas cannot. We can do home services. We can wash the body after they pass. We can explain the process. We'll do anything to make the person passing away, also known as a decedent. So I'll say decedent a lot because that's our technical term.
Okay.
Anything that makes the decedent comfortable and also explains to the family what's happening. We also educate and advocate for the family. So we can help with end of life wishes, with care. We can talk to a hospice specialist to say, hey, so and so doesn't want to eat, or maybe they do, or they'd rather be at home instead of in a hospital. Like, we advocate for the family and help with the medical field.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I guess before we dive too deep into what you're doing now and what all that entails, I'm really curious about, as you said, you went from dancer to where you're at now. A lot of things in between as well. So from like early stages of like, was it just like a 180 that like something happened or something came up in your life that you went that route? Or was this was death something that you were interested in from a young age or fascinated by or like experienced a lot of or anything?
I haven't experienced a ton of personal death in my life. I had a couple of friends pass away my senior year of high school, and my grandparents passed away. I think I have been fascinated with the darker side of life my whole life, but I don't live my personal life that way. So I want to try everything and do all of the hobbies and travel all over the world and learn all of the different cultures. But I'm fascinated with dark art, Halloween, that culture. I've always wanted to own a hearse. I find a lot of beauty in death, and I always have. Growing up, that was a very taboo subject, and I didn't talk about it openly because I was labeled as weird or the goth girl. And I didn't want to be that. So I just didn't talk about it out loud. Once I got to Tacoma, when I first moved here, I was applying for office manager positions, and a care center here in Kent was hiring, and it was a care center for the deceased. And I thought, well, sure, like, we'll give this a go. I've never really worked one-on-one with this, but I think I can. And I got in there, and I can. And I felt it was the most heart-fulfilling work I've ever done, to take care of somebody and someone's family member after they pass. And when they have no clue, typically a family member passes and they leave your house and you have no clue what happens to them until they come back to you as ashes in a box.
Yes.
But yeah. I am taking care of them that whole time. I transport them. I make sure they get cremated, that your actual loved one gets cremated. There's a lot of horror stories, but I make sure that that's your loved one, that they go through the process and that they come back to you safe. And there's a lot of steps between the time they leave your house till they come back to you. So it's really amazing heart work that we do. But where I geek out is on disposition methods, because there's not only just cremation, there's a ton of other methods. And so it piqued my interest. And then, I went down the doula route because the industry is necessary, but I don't love all aspects of it. So I went down kind of a different path. Rather than working at the care center, I went for the more educational route.
I love that part of it, is just the knowing that someone's caring for your loved one after, because I personally have not either dealt with a lot of death like immediate to me or anything, so I haven't really been there, but it's been something like death for me growing up was always very scary. I hated talking about it. I was afraid like if I even had that thought, like then it was going to happen to like my mom or dad or something. I just never ever wanted to think about it. And as I got older and like experienced it with my grandparents, I feel like I kind of at one just shut off, and almost as if I still haven't dealt with them actually being gone, because it's weird of like, oh, they were there and now they're not. Like, how do I even process that? Like, and just kind of shut off once someone passes away, of not even wanting to consider the other elements, but I've always wondered. And you're like, yeah, what with cremation, how are you knowing that that's like what is happening? Are they okay still? And when is it okay to kind of like, when do I really say my goodbyes, or how do I deal with anything after? But I just had no idea anything like a death doula existed to kind of either answer those questions or just be there to support in whatever you're feeling. So that's amazing to have.
We're out there. There's a
Yeah.
lot of us. It's surprising how many death doulas are out there. Typically, it's community work.
Mm-hmm.
It's typically a voluntary role. I made a business out of it, but that's not always the case.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times people feel called to doing this type of work, and they give it to the community as heart work. Not that heart work can't be a job as well, but yeah, it's typically a community role.
So when you decided you wanted to go the doula route from the care service, did you immediately like start your own business, or is there some like, did you start doing it volunteering, or how did that kind of evolve into where you're at now with your business, Forget Me Not?
So I did training through a Sacred Passing here in Tacoma, and they're amazing. I trained with a woman named Lashana, and she's phenomenal. And I kind of went through the training for myself just to see how it resonated with me and if I liked it. And then right after that, I acquired a hearse, a beautiful hearse, and I drove it to work, and I worked for a chiropractic office. And a patient came in and said, "Is that your hearse?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Why do you have that?" And I said, "Well, I'm a death doula." Well, he came back the next class and he said, "I'm going to work with you. We're going to start a business. I think you need to start a business." So he saw something in my death doula work, and it kind of just lined up funny. And he goes, "I'm going to do this for you complimentary. You don't have to pay me. I just really want you to start a business in this." And I was like, "You're high."
Yeah.
I have no desire to be a business owner. That is way too much pressure.
Yeah.
Thanks, but no thanks. And he was like, "No, do this. I'm serious." So I sat down with him and I came home and I was like, "Yeah, that's very kind, but this is not for me." So I went and I got in the bathtub. And as I'm sitting in the bathtub, kind of zenning out, I yelled two at maybe one and the same, my significant other. And I was like, "The name of my business is Forget Me Not. I'm going to take a holistic approach to end of life planning for individuals who are not imminent death. We're going to go out there and we're going to teach. We're going to fill in all the gaps." And he walks in and he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "I know exactly what I'm going to do. We're going to make a workbook. It's going to be awesome." And of course, he's super supportive. And he was like, "Yeah, let's go. Let's do this." Sat down with one of his best guy friends. And I'm like, "Hey, can I use you for just like, I just want to talk to you about death?" And he was like, sure. And I asked him all of these questions that made up the workbook, and the rest is history. He saw something that I didn't see, and he pushed it, and here we are.
Dude,
That's
that is
amazing.
amazing. I didn't know that story.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
One of these days I'll get him to make a workbook too, but we're not there yet.
Everything takes time, because
takes time.
I've utilized your services. I have a death plan in place, and I'm so grateful for it, because I don't have family members that I trust when and or if my time comes to leave, who and where to leave Quincy with, whether it's Murray and I go together or like whatever happens. It's just nice to have that peace of mind of knowing everything's going to be okay for you and your family once you are gone. And yeah, it just opens up room for not being afraid of death once you sit down and have these conversations.
Right. Then you live life.
Yeah.
Because you're not fearful of death. I mean, that's the goal, right? Like, not to sound funny, but death is the easy part. It's inevitable. It's part of life. It's going to happen. You can't cheat death. It's going to happen. Life is hard. There's a
Yeah.
lot of twists and turns and unknowns and grief and trauma and loss. Like life is hard.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take away the taboo subject of death and just say, hey, you know what? You're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get a plan in place. You're not manifesting it because it's going to happen.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're not manifesting anything that is already inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get a plan in place and then go live life.
Yes.
Right.
Go bungee jump, go skydive, move to Hawaii. And it really forces you to look at what you have here. And if this is really the life you're wanting to live, because
Yes.
it is short, you know, this is your time on this planet and you want to live it to the fullest. But to be fearful of death and not confront it stops you from living your life to the fullest.
1000%.
Right. And I feel like so there's different ways, like people, if parents or whatever, or anybody who is afraid to like leave something behind, like then that's their fear of death. Maybe it's like what's going to happen to my family, my business, or whatever it may be, my dogs, my cats, whatever. And then there's a side of people who I feel like how I felt, again, I was young, I was a child, of like being afraid of it happening to me in the sense of losing my parents or anyone close to me. And then like, how do I go on with life without them? So you have the one side of the coin of like being afraid of yourself dying and what's going to happen to the things you're leaving behind. And the other side being like, what's going to happen to me if so and so or dies or I lose this or that. And so you address kind of all of those things for anybody, just death in general and how to deal with it no matter what side of it you may be fearful of.
Right. So let's say for example, you and I sit down and we come up with a plan for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now you know exactly what type of disposition you want and what you want done with your body after death. You're not scared to talk about it anymore because you've already talked about it. So maybe you go have a conversation with mom and dad. Hey, guess what I learned? Hey, what do you want? And then you come up with this holistic plan for your parents. I'm not saying it's not going to be hard when they go, but it could be easier knowing that you're honoring their wishes and you've had this conversation ahead of time to say, oh yeah, this is what mom wanted. This is what my dad wanted. I can do this for them even after death. And it becomes a beautiful ritual or ceremony. And it's not necessarily just the stress of now they're gone. What do I do? And it's all this white noise. Now it's like, oh, we have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we just did the book with you, but now you understand what to talk to them about.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps you with their death as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the grief, which grief is very,
Yes.
grief is a change in a familiar pattern of behavior resulting in loss. There's all kinds of loss besides just the loss of a parent or a sibling or a pet. There's the loss of trust. There's, any undelivered communication or unmet expectation, like those are all grief components. So we work with that at that time too.
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring up of loss isn't always just a death in a family or a friend. I think Amber and I have talked about like divorce or like breaking up or something that can be, that's like a loss. A lot of people say that, it's like a death because you have lost that person or a piece of you or part of you with whatever may have gone with that relationship. And people don't consider things like that, or even losing a job. If you identify yourself as someone, I think a lot in the terms of like athletes who identify themselves as like, I am a whatever sport, like, and that's it, that's all I have in my life, and then they get hurt and can't play or retire or whatever, and then it's like, well, who am I? Like, what do I do? Like, that was my identity. So loss of identity in itself, like, how do you move on from that? And that can be from all those things, where losing a person in your life in any way of, again, like, you identified yourself as being like this person's daughter, significant other, or whatever. Like, I like that you're speaking in general terms of like just loss.
And your sports, not finding words, example is perfect, because not only is that a loss of your identity as a football player, let's say, but it's also a loss of body, because if you got injured and now you can't play the sport, now it's a loss of what your body could do. So now you have to build a new relationship with this new body that can't do what it did before. It's a loss of potential income.
Mm-hmm.
It's a loss of your teammates and friends. There's that all right there. There's 4 losses all just in one loss. So you tease each one of those out and complete a relationship there and build a new relationship from this new person and new friends and new income and new body. So there's, any change in a familiar pattern of behavior.
That's just an amazing way to think about it. It's like I said, I feel like, again, with the term, if someone was just to look at you and say like death doula, like not under, obviously if they talk to you and they learn more about services and whatnot, they learn, but even just in this conversation, as we brought it up, is that like you're a death doula of people like, no, like let's open that up. It's a lot more to do with just that, again, like loss. So with your workbook, then, is that just a series of steps for dealing with any kind of loss? And as you go through that, you kind of just like pinpoint in onto what exactly kind of loss you're talking about?
So my workbook is a death workbook.
Okay.
So that you and I would sit down and I'd say, who are you? How do you identify? What are you proud of in life? What materialistic things do you love? Okay, what do you want done with your body? What do you want done after the remains of your body come back? What type of service do you want? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What do you want people to wear? You know, is there going to be limbo? Is there going to be a limbo line? Do you want everyone to do the cha-cha? Like we really break it all down. And then we write almost like a living obituary for you. So that if anything happened in an accident, your friends and family could read that and be like, oh my gosh, this was 100% she, her. Are you a she, her?
Yes.
Okay. This is 1000% what she wanted, right? And then it's a beautiful thing. And yes, it's still sad, but it's also beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And then behind that's the workbook that has your passwords for your accounts, what to do with your animals when you pass away, who to plan your service that you've shared this book with, because maybe your mom and dad, if you pass away before them, maybe they're not the ones to plan the service for you, but you want Amber to do it. So you put Amber down and you put her phone number and she knows exactly what you want. So that's all behind, and notes, because your life is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
So you just keep adding to this workbook and building on it. And, you know, maybe you really wanted Coldplay played at your service and now you can't stand Coldplay because you've listened to the record way too many times, but you want Alanis on there. Okay, it's like you can change these things up because it's always evolving. Now it acts as a time capsule. On the grief side, I am certified through the Grief Recovery Institute. So I specifically use the grief recovery method as my program. And that does come with a book as well. The book talks you through the different steps. And then we meet once a week for 8 weeks. And you have homework and we tease out the losses throughout your life. And we work on completing a relationship. But really, and this is not correct grammar, we unlearn everything that you've learned and we start from scratch on how to help other people work through grief in life, and a good response versus I'm sorry for your loss or time heals all, like things that are not helpful. We unlearn all of that. And I give you new tools and new resources to use. Also, how to put up boundaries so that you don't have to take on somebody else's grief, but you know how to help them and make them feel good without having to feel it yourself. And Amber can probably speak to this. I'm putting you on blast because I know you've talked about this in your other podcasts. But she's going through it right now. I mean, if you want to share, you're welcome to share your own experience.
No, we actually, our meeting is tonight, and if I'm allowed to share, our homework for this week is our grief loss timeline. So you start from your very first memory that you remember, not like a picture or a video that someone showed you of like, here's you as a kid. It's like your memory of your life, the first one, which mine was tying my shoes on my kitchen table and being like, I just like remember being so proud. And so that's where my conscious memory starts. And I was probably like 4 or 5. And so you go through your life and you jot down and track your significant losses, your and I don't even think I should call these like significant or insignificant, because every loss is a loss, but like your most impactful losses and your not so impactful losses, and you go through that and break it down, and then we take what we've learned in previous weeks as far as like myths about death and the way that we as humans react to our grief and trauma and whatever life throws our way, and break it all down. I mean, I'm still in the learning process, so it's hard to see big picture, but I think that as we go on each week, I'm starting to see it more and more. And I remember in one of our first meetings, I was just like, man, Nicole's got the wheel and she knows exactly all the paths we're going to go down. And yeah, it's been really lovely. And we're in a group setting, and it's just so supportive and amazing to hear other people's stories and be like, okay, like I'm not alone in this, and I'm not alone, and everybody's experienced loss, whether it's you lost a shoe, or I wanted to put one of my losses on there that I thought I was going to put but that I ended up not putting was, I remember I had this keychain collection when I was a kid, and someone stole it from me or I lost it, and I still freaking think about that keychain collection, and I'm still pissed about it. And
Add it to the lost
Add it to the
timeline.
list.
Yeah.
Child of the 90s.
Yeah.
Because I remember a impactful loss on me was when I lost my blankie in the store, and I pulled it up. I just had a strand left, and when I realized the rest of that thing wasn't behind me, I just lost my shit. And it was probably like 3 or 4 in the grocery store, and like,
And
because it was a secure, like I needed that thing everywhere I went. Like my mom always got me this video from the library every time we went. It was a book and a video of like, please don't wash my blankie today. Like, she'd have to give me something else when she washed it. But like you said, like anything I like the word that you used, impactful, rather than significant or insignificant, especially depending on where you're at in your life. Like, so it's like whether it's just some kind of thing of security, or for me, I hate like these days when I misplace something, I cannot stop thinking about it. And so with that keychain, I feel like, where the hell, like I know, if I just knew that this kid took it or I left it here, I'd have more I would just be okay with it, like closure almost. Like,
for sure.
So it's so funny you bring that up.
Yeah, and like even with your blanket story, like you still have feelings associated with these memories and these things that we go through life getting attached to. And
yes, because all about that. Well, I guess not all about, but that's a good point, is like I think a lot of it does stem from some kind of attachment, right? A loss has to be because you were attached to something in some way. And,
it's a familiar pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
Your blankie was very familiar to you. It went everywhere. It was with you for every part of your life. And grief is experienced at 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Society tells us, oh, it's just a blankie, get over it. And you're like, no, that was my soul.
Yes.
Yes, that was a familiar pattern of behavior for you. Of course there's grief around that.
Yeah, I love making that okay, because society just makes you feel bad for feeling bad, like telling you what you should feel and when you should feel it. And that's around all things in our life that we experience. Like, no, you should be happy about this, you shouldn't be sad about that, whatever it is. Like, you, to someone else, like, you have the perfect life, you should be so grateful and happy, and you're like, yeah, but like something inside me is still not like fulfilled, and you can't explain that to everybody. They're just like, no, you have it all, like you're fine. It's like, no, not really. But people are always just telling you how you should feel and when you should feel more or less.
And you know what people should be saying, in my opinion? It is okay to not be okay.
Yeah. I absolutely love also that in your workbook you talk about what to say to people, because I definitely struggle with that through whatever they're going through. Like, okay, yeah, it's hard. What do you say? Like, I'm so sorry. And you feel like that's and we talked about this a lot when Murray's dad passed away, and you bringing that up, Amber, of just like what to say to his mom, because like, yes, like you're so sorry that, and that stems from, mostly for me, like I say that because I'm so sorry that there's nothing else that I feel I can do or say. I just have no idea, but sometimes people do just need that space and really just go give someone a hug and sit there with them. You don't always have to say something, but you feel at least initially you have to give your condolences in the way that we are, most normally taught of, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry for your loss. And it's just like, it doesn't hit. It doesn't hit.
No, you're right. A lot of times a hug or just sitting there goes a long way. But also to say I'm sorry for your loss to somebody as a blanket statement, what if they're not sorry for their loss? What if they're glad that they lost that person? And now they feel bad because they don't feel sorry?
Yeah,
like, it's
wow.
really not a blanket term. And they're not going to sit there and be like, I'm not sorry for my loss, because that makes them sound heartless. So it puts people in a very uncomfortable position. So I'm sorry for your loss, I think, is a really terrible blanket term.
Yeah.
Now, it really is individual. If you know this individual personally and very well, and you feel comfortable saying that to that person because you know them so well, great. Otherwise, just simply say, my heart is with you. There's nothing offensive about that. And it's a true statement. Another thing that you can do is, if you have the capacity, say, is there anything you want to tell me right now? Or how do you feel in this moment? And that's not asking them to reflect on their past. That's not asking them to go into, a grief cycle or anything like that. It's just, how do you feel right now? Or is there anything you want to tell me?
Yeah.
And that opens up space for them, because a lot of times people just want to be heard. And we should never grieve alone. We do better grieving when we have others there. So to be heard in those moments sometimes is the best. And if they don't want to talk to you, they will be honest. They're like, no, I don't have anything to say right now. And you're like, okay.
Right. And I mean, because of what we're taught, I also feel like people may hold back a lot too. So it might take them a while to be able to come to you, and you just kind of have to continue being there and ask those questions, because the first time they're like, yeah, no, I don't, like, I shouldn't say this, I shouldn't say that, because what if it's just like, I feel hungry, and what I'd really love is to go get like a bite to eat with my friend and not, remove myself from this situation for a minute. And you might feel guilty for saying something like that, feeling like I need to be sad 24/7 for 5 years, like, to deal with the loss of this. So that's just, again, things that we don't think about, because I mean, some people have dealt with a lot of loss. Amber, you've personally dealt with a lot of loss, but others haven't, like me. So where I'm like, I don't know what to do in this situation because I cannot relate.
Yeah. And
So
when you get used to, like, because I've lost my mother, and at a young age, I was 17 when I lost her. And when you get used to not having those pillars around, you're just like, oh, okay, it's just how my life is. And and whether you've dealt with that death or not, it just is your life, and you go along. And then your friend comes up to you and is like, hey, I think you should do this grief workshop. And you're like, but I'm a professional at grieving, my friend. And then you do the grief workshop and you're like, oh shit. You learn a lot. It's yeah, the work you do, Nicole, is just so great. And I'm just so proud of you as your friend and as a client. And it's just been really lovely going on all these journeys with you.
I'm proud of you. You're the one doing the work.
Yes.
I may be facilitating and holding space for you, but you, my friend, are the one doing the work.
Yes,
and amazing work you are doing.
Thank you, friend. And it's also great to see, like, do this podcast with Taryn, not knowing a lot of like all the things that you do, and her going through her realizations. And so I kind of feel like I'm in your shoes, where you're just like, you just sit back and you let the people think their thoughts, and the work is we're doing it, it's ourselves.
Yeah. And so actually, I do want to ask you, Amber, what is this, your third week in the?
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think we're in to the 4th.
Okay. So how have you felt doing it? Like, you're noticing, like, you're digging deep and kind of getting into things that maybe you thought were put to bed, and and weren't, or like, I don't know, just like give us a little taste of your overall
Yeah.
experience in this, because like you said, you are thought of by me and yourself as like a professional, as someone who's lost a lot of close people from a young age, that it's like, okay, yeah, you know how to kind of go through it, but I mean, every situation's different too, and you're at different stages in your life through all of it. So what is it like going through this yourself?
So far, for the first 4 weeks, the first 3 weeks, I would say, are pretty quote unquote easy. Essentially what you're doing is you're building a foundation of um, misinformation or like fault, like things that we've picked up as a society along the ways of like, pick up your bootstraps, cowboy, and move on. Like, don't be sad, and all that kind of like quick things to say for people because we have a hard time dealing with emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of that. And then it's also looking back at your behaviors and the different behaviors that you pick up in those times of grief, and whether good or bad, how to hopefully in the next cycle of grief or whatever you got going on through, to acknowledge your behaviors and hopefully correct them, or deal with it better, sit with it better, however you go about it. And so with this week coming up, doing the timeline is when we start to really sit back and think of the things that have happened in our lives. And when I went into the grief recovery program, I felt like, because in the first meeting, it's like, okay, so what things of loss brought you here today? And so I was like, oh, I'll just say the most impactful deaths of my life, and I'm sure other things will come up and it won't be about those most impactful deaths of my life. When as I'm doing the work, I'm like, oh, those really are the most impactful deaths. And that really, like, losing my mother and then also losing a baby in my body at 36 weeks is what I'm working on. And I definitely feel like I've been working a lot on losing Lucas and talking about that the most. And yeah, it's just wild how all this stuff comes up. And then you also think about your pets that you lost as a kid, or like on my on my grief timeline, I also put my first breakup, and I put it down as like a toxic, like traumatic, icky thing. I was like, my first breakup, icky, like,
Yeah, I love
so it's just,
icky. Yeah.
yeah, icky. It's just, there's just so many things in our life that are of grief, and sometimes it's trauma, and sometimes it's grief, and sometimes it's something totally else. So also trying to acknowledge what these hardships are in your life,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to like put them in a compartment and being like, oh, this was my trauma, oh, this was my grief, and this is how I'm going to process and deal with it now that I have these tools, and now that I look at the world a different way and have all these tools. It's really great, and still only halfway through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say it sounds, because she's in like the hardest week so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that right now everything is open and we're pouring a little bit of salt in the wound.
Mm-hmm.
But I promise by the end I give you a good glob of super glue and we put everything back together.
Mm-hmm.
We close it.
That's amazing. I mean, that's what it takes times to tear things apart to be able to put them back together in the correct way, because maybe
Yes.
when you glued that like broken vase together, like there was, that piece wasn't in the exact right spot, whatever, and that's what we kind of have to do. I feel like, especially at whether it's a young age or just at a certain point in your life, or just not having the tools, that you don't know how to put the pieces back together, so you kind of do the best you can, and a lot of people just forget about it. They're like, it's together. It's fine.
Yeah.
We're upright. We're good. Like,
Got over that.
let's
Is
not
it-
worry about it. Let's not dig it back up and try to see if we can put it back together better, because
Is it
it's there.
Japan or Japanese culture where if a vase breaks, they put it back together with gold?
Oh, I
Like
don't
the
know.
gold.
I think you're right.
I have heard of that, but I have no idea like what culture or anything.
I think it's Japanese.
But
Gotta
that's a
go to
great
the-
like analogy to think about for sure. It's like, yeah, putting it and
Yeah.
but that's the thing, we don't take the time, right? Or you don't have the tools again, or people around you to help you to even try to put it back together better. It's just like quickly hurry up, put it back, put it back, put it back. Like let's get on with
Fix
life.
it.
Move on.
Just
Yeah.
fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by mending the areas of breakage with lacquer dusted or mixed with powdered gold. That's what we're doing.
Yes,
We're
that is-
gonna
That's your mission statement.
A new analogy, because in one of the first classes we used the analogy of like putting a bandage over an infected wound and
Mhm.
then unpeeling the bandage and then addressing the infection.
Yeah.
But I think the vase is significantly more beautiful than an infected wound.
you know,
Yes.
it's if you're visual, it's a much prettier picture.
Yeah,
I just think
Absolutely. I'm very visual, so I
I
was
was just
like,
very impactful on that first
yeah,
class.
yeah. But I mean, always, right? Everyone thinks of something differently and can relate differently. So having multiple ways to explain or compare is ultimately the best way. So you're with Forget Me Not, then you started as a doula. Like, when did the grief services come in, and what other kind of services do you offer through Forget Me Not? Kind of, do people start anywhere in it, or do you normally get people starting at one and it kind of snowballs into doing something else?
I typically get one or the other.
Mhm.
So my grief services came in December, so I'm pretty new at the grief recovery method. I went out looking for counselors or grief specific therapists, and there's just not a whole lot out there that
Mhm.
deals with grief as a whole without being faith-based, which is
Mhm.
fine. But for some that, one size doesn't fit all. So I needed to get something together that wasn't faith-based, that was grief specific. So the grief component came on in December, and I'm finding that I would love them to go hand in hand. Like if we work through your grief, then maybe we can get a death plan in place too. Or let's get a death plan in place. And now that you've met me and you trust me, maybe we can tackle some of your grief.
Mhm.
But I'm finding that I either have people come to me for a death plan or grief, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, you bringing up the faith-based, that was something I wanted to ask. Towards the beginning, it came up, and that is also for me, feel like a lot of people don't address death, especially if they are very wrapped up in a faith, because either it's like they think like, oh, it's just there they go to so and so and forever and on and on. And so then maybe don't address it because they're like, there's nothing for me to like their grief or whatever. So do you, gosh, I guess I don't even really know how to ask it. Do you have anyone ever come to you who is faith-based and wanting answers, like wanting you to give them more of those answers, or anybody who is kind of in the middle, or like how do you address faith, I guess, at all in your business?
I honor your faith if that's what you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like faith can be either so positive and so negative. I have people come to me that because they don't believe in what they were raised with, that now they don't have a relationship with God anymore, and there's a grief cycle there. So I'm finding that a loss of faith is also grief. But then when it comes to death, a lot of times faith can be really beautiful because that family believes that there is something for them after death. Either way, I honor it.
Yeah.
However, when I do have clients come to me and say, I want you to tell me what comes after death, I can't tell you that. I can't give you those answers. That's something that you have to seek out that answer for yourself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess that's where I was kind of going with that of when people are in that limbo, I guess, of not being too sure. And because that for me as at a younger age was the main thing of really not knowing. Like I grew up, my mom was very Lutheran and we went to church when at a young age, but not for very long. And she never like pounded any beliefs into her head or anything. Like we went to Sunday school, but it was never like oh, we always pray, and my dad didn't come with us or anything. So it was very just like, yeah, you do you. And she still has beliefs and faith and whatnot. But like we never really were raised with those, so like as hardcore like yes or no. So I guess that's where I would feel confused at a young age of like, I don't think there's like this, and how am I going to know? How am I going to know? The unknown was just what's really scary. And I think that is for a lot of people, again, whether it's like what's going to happen to my person afterwards, or what's going to happen to me, or just so many questions people have. So
Yeah.
at least having you.
Oh, I was going to say, I feel like a lot of people do come to you, Nicole, for your services with all of these questions. And I just want to say, I feel like you do a really good job of asking the appropriate questions, being an ear to listen, and letting your clients feel like they have the power to learn the knowledge, to know that the answers are within them the entire time.
Love that.
Yes.
That is so beautiful.
I just guide you, but ultimately you get there yourself. And we get you to a place where by the time you leave, you feel very confident in what you have chosen. Now, I will say that depending on your faith, that will change disposition method too. So there are some religions that you have to be buried. Or some religions or faiths that feel like you should or have to be cremated. That's an interesting conversation to have too, because let's say your parents are very religious, but you are not. And let's say you do not want to be buried, but that's what your parents know. By signing your own cremation authorization, aquamation authorization, or natural organic authorization, by signing your own, you are in charge of what happens to your physical body in case an accident happens. So, I mean, that's like, I will scream it from the mountaintops, like self-authorize. Like, let's talk about what you want so that you get the disposition of your choice, and not necessarily what your parents might want for you or your significant other might want for you. If you don't have that, if you can't have that conversation, which I feel like everyone should, but if you can't, you can be in charge of the skin suit and what happens to it when you pass. Like, you're in charge.
I love this conversation because I've never ever thought about my death, not that of like being fearful or anything, but like what would happen after. Because one, being like not being a parent or owning a bunch of assets, I haven't felt it necessary to like go create a will, because that's just what people know, right? It's like, okay, I'm gonna go make a will, and that's where, especially if you're a parent, you're in your will, you're gonna write who the care of the children go to, or the house or the money or whatever. And because I don't have anything, I've never like thought about it. I'm like, well, my parents are going to be very sad, but they can do whatever they want. But I also know that they may be so sad, along with my brother, that actually having a plan in place could just help them so much through the process of like, hey, here you go. Like, you don't, you're already in a place like planning this or that for this terrible tragedy is nowhere that your mind can even go. So it's already here for you. And again, where I might put somebody like Amber, like, look, I know they're going to be a wreck and my mom's not going to be able to do anything. So you're going to be my go-to person of having this and helping them see this through. And that's just something like, oh, okay, I actually feel like I could do something like that, and absolutely should, so that I feel that the people in my life are taken care of and have a little less off their plate and can just grieve.
Dude, you hit the nail on the freaking head.
And it's not a little bit off their plate.
Yeah.
It's a lot off their plate to have to worry about that. Amber, can I share yours?
Yes, please do.
Amber is self-authorized. She is being naturally, organically reduced, so human composting, and she's going to give back to the earth with really beautiful soil. but she's self-authorized.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't fall on Quincy when she passes away. It doesn't fall on her husband when she passes away. They just get to love her and grieve and live through their own processing,
Mm-hmm.
and everything else is taken care of for them.
Mm-hmm.
And when you self-authorize, that doesn't mean you have to prepay.
Mm-hmm.
You can pre-plan. It's called pre-need. You can go to the funeral home of your choice and you can pre-need. You can set up a plan and lock a price in place and pay ahead of time if you'd like. But you don't have to. Like, I'm self-authorized also to be naturally organically reduced. My authorization's filled out. They have it. If something happens to me, that's where I go. But I haven't paid yet.
Mm-hmm.
And if you move to a different state, you just self-authorize there. Like, there's nothing, it's set in stone that you're self-authorized, but it's not like you don't have to pay right now. You're not locked into any sort of pricing.
You're not going to buy like a plot right now at the cemetery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So can you expand a little bit on self-authorizing and what that means as far as, so that's what I was wondering too, is so you have this plan, right? But who is actually going to make sure that happens? So if I wanted to be cremated, but my parents really wanted something else, who makes sure that happens?
You. If you self-authorize saying, I want to be cremated, that's what I want, and I signed all the paperwork and sent it to my funeral home of choice, you're self-authorized.
Yeah.
It's you've signed the paperwork. It's not up to your parents at that point. That was your signature.
Yeah.
And I always encourage people, when they have like a workbook or a death plan like what we do, put it on top of your refrigerator.
Yeah.
Don't put it in a safe, because if you pass away and nobody knows the combination to your safe, nobody knows that it exists.
Can you put it on the cloud?
Sure, as long as someone has access to your cloud. Because if someone doesn't have the password to get into your computer, then
totally,
then there's no cloud, right?
Yeah.
So mine's on top of the fridge, and Jake, my significant other, knows that. So if something happens to me, my self-authorization paperwork is in there, my death workbook is in there, it's all in there. And all he has to do is open it up and say, okay, I'm going to call this person and they're going to take care of everything for me. So, yeah.
I think that's very cool because, as I said, I feel like it's not till a certain point, usually of age, that people start thinking about wills and whatnot, and whether that's like as soon as you have kids or something happens in life where someone's ill or something, they really make sure things are in place, and you don't think of the fact of in your mid-20s, mid-30s or whatever that you should have something. But as I said, is the simple fact for me thinking about it now is like, oh, like I can just let my family grieve and don't have to make them set aside the time to figure this all out and then try and grieve, because I can't, I always think about that when people are going through a loss of a death of someone, whether it's their child or mother or someone very close to them, how they almost have to put things, just like put it to the side and not even deal with it, so that they can deal with funerals and afterlife plans and like, oh, do I have to sell this house, take care of their bills, all that. They have to deal with all of that first and foremost, because that's in their face, and can't properly deal with the actual loss until a little bit later. And sometimes they even don't get to it because they've already put it off, that they're just like just totally
the vase
tunnel
is
vision.
Put together.
Yeah.
And I will say too, just because we're talking about it, like, I'm not going to ever have kids. So let's say Jake and I get in an accident together, then I want to make sure everything's in place. Not for anybody else who's grieving, but just because there's really nobody that's going to take care of me. Like if I outlive my parents and Jake goes with me, at least the medical examiner will know what I wanted. I took care of myself. Does that make sense? I do have to look into, because now I'm curious, if you self-authorize, can somebody override that self-authorization? That's something I need to look into. Always learning, right? But I always encourage self-authorization, just because if it's in writing and it's notarized or witnessed, I mean,
the next steps are already in place.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that. So I'm bringing it up to remind myself that I need to
Yeah.
ask that question.
Well, because
But
especially like so if you know, are around, you have family or friends or whatever, you know that they trust you and whatever you want, they're going to give you. But there's, you know, some people who, yeah, the people who are actually taking care of the things are like, nope, whatever they said, like that is not what I want for them. Just over controlling people. Like, yeah, can they override this or that? And I mean, I
yeah,
still think
curious.
for yourself, it's going to have just a huge impact. Like, you know, you did everything you could to set yourself up in the way that you wanted to. Because, like you said, death is the easy part. So,
Yeah.
all in all, after the fact, like if something different happens than what you wanted, that sucks, but you can still leave this earth knowing that you put everything you wanted to or needed to in its place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
I know we're wrapping up on time.
yeah,
Is there any funky questions you wanted to ask me?
I wish I had some. I don't know if I
Okay.
do.
Is there anything funky you want to talk about?
Oh
Yeah,
man.
bring something up because I'm like, I don't know. I don't have a very good morbid brain.
I have so many things I could share. I don't know, not off the top of my head. I just, if you had any questions, I was just curious
Yeah.
if you're like, oh, I want to know, but I don't know if I want to ask because it's morbid and it's
Yeah.
not, it's just a part of life. So, you know, you can ask me anything.
Oh, actually, okay, so disposition, you've said it. I think obviously you people could gather that that means like how you want your body disposed of at death.
Mhm.
So you mentioned obviously burial, cremation, and then natural, organic, natural
Okay. So and it depends on what state and country. I mean, there's
yeah.
different things everywhere. So I always suggest that you look into your own state and what they offer. But we'll say cremation, aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis, which is like cremation but with water. There's natural organic reduction, which is amazing and getting legalized in so many places, which basically it's human composting. Some states have body farms. There's whole body
Wow.
donation. There's natural burials where you're shrouded or you're put in a casket or coffin that will, like a wicker or wood that will decompose. So there's natural burials. Then there's what we call traditional burials, like in a cemetery. There's, you know, the vault and all the things.
Mhm.
So there's traditional. And I'm trying to think, I'm pretty sure that's it for right
With
now. Open air pyres, there's one in Colorado, but you have to be,
wait,
you have to live there.
open air what?
Pyre, like what the Vikings really used, you know, not the flaming ship, but like what they actually did, and which is an open air cremation tray kind of. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I had no idea. Even with the natural burial or
Organic reduction, yeah,
yeah.
NOR.
Yeah, so that's becoming more, I don't know, popular. Is like
Yes, yes, there are states that are passing saying, okay, we're going to offer this. It's truly the only way that you can be a tree.
yeah,
You'll see the
right?
tree pod online with the human that's in like a fetal position in the tree pod and then the tree growing out of it. It's
Uh-huh.
an art installation. It's not a real thing.
Yeah.
We can always break down why it's not later. But natural organic reduction, you get 1 cubic yard of super rich soil back, and you can give back to the planet with that.
Wow.
It's beautiful. It's a really beautiful process. I think in some parts of the world there's still sky burial. If you feel like
What's
looking that one up.
yeah.
That's also
Sky.
giving back to the
Then
birds.
send you off just on a rocket.
Not quite. I'll
I
let
was
you look into
listening
that one because that's not really a
But
thing anymore.
everybody, I know I'm gonna Google it
I'm
later.
gonna have to because the other day this song popped in my head and I started listening to Frank Sinatra, "Fly Me to the Moon." So now
Yeah.
I fly
You can
me
fly
to
your
the
ashes to the moon.
moon. Oh,
They
really?
do space launches with your
Oh my
ashes.
God.
Yeah.
That's how
Possibilities
I've
are
figured
endless.
cremation because I want to, like, anyone who wants a part of me can have me, like, you know, make a little necklace ring, whatever. And then I also want just ashes to be spread in places that I love. But that's also at a time where I had just, you know, no other options were really known very well besides burial and cremation. So
Check out aquamation.
yeah.
Great on the environment. You get twice as many ashes back. They float, which is kind of
Ooh.
interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, no carbon output with aquamation, which is nice.
Very cool.
It's like
That,
a beautiful bath, a beautiful disposition bath.
I love it. That is awesome. I'm sure that now, as we've like broached this subject, that I'll probably think of some things like, oh my God, I have to ask Nicole about that.
Yeah,
I was more so
reach out.
just so interested in exactly just what you do. Because as I said in the beginning of it, like we've heard of birth doulas, but not a lot of death doulas and exactly how and what they do. And the fact that you also mentioned you give people tools that they can then carry on and teach other people is amazing, because a lot of industries you're like, nope, come to me, pay me for this, come to this, like, you know, it's not about you getting better in life and spreading this, and you're all about, nope, I'm going to teach you and you now go off and you spread this, like just webs of knowledge and information out to the world. And so anyone who does work that is meant to be shared with others, I think needs to be recognized. So that's amazing, and I'm so happy to have gotten to talk to you and learn some stuff and just make my mind think in ways that it hasn't thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So
And
if anyone out there too has questions, sorry, Amber,
no,
like
you're good.
hit us up, let us know, because we will definitely pass these on to Nicole, and we'll also leave all her information in our show notes that you can reach out to her as well. But what were you gonna say, Amber?
Oh, I was going to say, Nicole, how can the people find you and what do you have going on in your life? How can they find out about the grief recovery process and your business?
Forgetmenotdoula.com. It's all there. You can reach out via email. I'm going to have the podcast on there. I'm redoing my website, so it'll be more user-friendly here shortly, but everything that you need to know is on there. Upcoming classes, talks, everything. The grief recovery method is outlined on there if anyone's curious about what that is. And also the workbook, a little bit about me, but that's the best way to get in contact. My phone number's on there too. You can reach out via text message. I love it.
Yeah. I do. That does.
You have Taboo Talk coming up.
I do. We're going to tour Return Home, which is the human composting facility here in Auburn, Washington.
Oh.
We're actually going to go to the facility and walk around, and you get to experience it firsthand.
And that's what you're going to do that, right, Amber?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. One question I had real quick was just based on around your services. So you're in Tacoma. We all know I'm in Truckee. Do you do any online services, like remote services for people who may want to like contact you, or is it all in person right now?
No, my death services, to create a death workbook, I can help anybody anywhere.
Okay.
Grief Recovery Institute, I'm in process of becoming advanced certified so that I will be able to do Zoom. Right now, I can't hold Zoom for the grief recovery program, so that will be all in person, but I'm hoping within a month or two, I'll have my advanced certification. Over Zoom, we lose a lot of the human experience.
Mm-hmm,
and so they're teaching us practices on how we can energetically and we can be present without being present, just to provide a little bit more grief support. So grief, I'm working on. I should be launched in a couple of months. But death work, yeah, we can do that over Zoom. I can help anybody anywhere. And then I just mail your workbook to you.
Cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, so we know where to find you. Like I said, that all that stuff will be in the show notes, so you can go directly to her website from there. And before we sign off, any last parting words from either of you ladies?
Thanks for coming, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, another powerful woman along this powerful month, and we just are always powerful every year, every month, every day.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we're going to sign off, and we will talk to everybody next week. We hope you enjoyed this episode and would do us a huge favor, since we don't have any sponsors or anything like that, and would rate and review us on whatever platform it is you use, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, whatever it is. And if you're listening and downloading just through the website, tearingituppodcast.com, leave comments. We'll definitely engage back with you. And on social media right now, we're just on Instagram. Tearing It Up Podcast is the handle. Like the post, share the post, comment on the post, whatever it is you got. Show us your love so we just stay relevant and show up in the rankings at all. So again, rate and review, please. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.